You have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever.
Stay hungry.
Hungry. Foolish. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Welcome to E-Commerce All-Stars, brought to you by Nadimo.com, where we help e-commerce entrepreneurs accelerate growth through modern technology and innovative thinking.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. This is your host, Brandon Moskowitz, of course, and today I'm excited we have Eric Almquist on the line. Hope I said that right there, Eric. He's the partner of Bain and Company. They recently did an interesting study called Delivering What Customers Really Value, and there's a lot of interesting insights. They surveyed more than 45,000 U.S. consumers and about their perceptions of 190 different companies across 22 different retail categories. So it's quite a interesting survey, and I've got some specific questions to ask him, and he's going to talk a lot about that with us today. But thanks for joining us today, Eric.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I think what you've put together here is of a lot of interest to me and hopefully to our listeners. So I was hoping if you could just give us a little bit of background on Bain and Company and a little bit of your insights into what you found with this study you did.
Sure. Well, Bain and Company is one of the top 3 consulting firms in the world. We have about 850 or so partners, over 6,000 employees, and lots of offices everywhere, it seems. And I lead customer insights for Bain, and I've been working for the last 5 or 6 years on a concept called the elements of value, and this research has to do with that. Bain has been at the forefront of focus on customers for many, many years. We helped develop the Net Promoter Score, for example, and the Net Promoter System, and other related topics. So this fits right in there.
Interesting. I believe personally, my thought, and I mean this might be a little bit out of place with what we're talking about today, but I think that a lot of the time the customer is forgotten about, and people try and deliver what they think they want and that sort of thing, but they don't really spend their time in the right areas necessarily. Your report talks about companies strong in 4 value elements. Can you talk a little bit about the value elements and then a little bit of your insights on that?
Sure. Well, this started in the early 2011-12 period. I had been thinking about value for a number of years, and in particular, I felt that our clients were challenged to think about and improve their value propositions, because thinking about what is valuable to people is kind of hard. And I thought that value is neither infinitely complex nor amorphous, and that if we applied some science to it, we could figure out what customers actually value. So we started to enumerate the elements of value back in around 2000, as I said, back in around 2011 and 12. We tested some of those ideas with some of our clients, and we got quite good feedback. And then we invested in the first research in 2015. We published this work first in the Harvard Business Review in 2016, and then we had a business-to-business version just this last year. So on the consumer side, we identified 30 elements of value. These range from functional elements to things that are more emotional, things that can be life-changing, and elements that can have a social impact. Just to give you an example of some of the functional elements, obviously products or services that save time or simplifies or help you reduce effort or reduce risk. Those are things we call functional elements, that they actually make your life easier. Emotional elements, there are numbers there. Obviously fun and entertainment are big aspects of life. And if you can provide that, it's very powerful. Anxiety reduction can be quite powerful because anxiety is a very powerful emotion. Design and aesthetics, attractiveness, that's how something makes you feel attractive. It could be clothes or cosmetics or whatever. That can be very powerful as well. Some of the life-changing elements have to do with motivation or heirloom, which is a term for providing value to future generations. Hope, self-actualization, which is sort of accomplishing your goals or mission in life. And then finally, social impact. We borrowed this directly from Abraham Maslow's work, The Hierarchy of Needs, Selftranscendence, which is about making the world a better place. And, a couple thoughts on these elements. One is our research shows that companies can do very well by delivering 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these elements. It's almost impossible to deliver all of them. It would be too costly. So companies tend to pick their spots, and if they do well on several of these, they can have a very good business depending on who their competitors are. The emotional elements tend to be worth more in terms of predicting net promoter score than the functional ones. But having said that, you can have a very good business by delivering on mostly functional elements, as Amazon has done, and I'll come back to that. And then finally, there are a few companies that have provided value sort of up the pyramid, if you will. Tom's Shoes gives away a pair of shoes for every pair they sell to someone who needs shoes. And they have made that very clear in their value proposition from the beginning. And it's very, very popular among younger generations here in the U.S. And they are the only company we found that clears our threshold on self-transcendence, which is at the top of the pyramid.
Interesting. Yeah, we've spoken about that on the show a few times, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, but and Tom's Shoes, it's obviously come up. I mean, it would be silly of us not to mention them, especially when you just said that they're the only company that clears whatever it was you said there. My words aren't coming to me.
Self-transcendence. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. A couple other patterns might be interesting to note. One is we've looked at the relationship between delivering on elements of value at a certain threshold, and I'll explain that in a second. But the more elements that one can deliver to consumers, the higher your NPS tends to be, higher your recent growth rates. And if you increase the elements of value over time, your share tends to increase, as well as net promoter score. So these are related to fundamental, positive trends of in a business. And so, the more value you can deliver, the better, obviously, within cost constraints of your business model.
Okay. I want to interrupt you for 1 second and just kind of circle back to net promoter score, because you've mentioned that a couple of times. Just for the clarity of the audience, if you don't mind just giving a very, very high level so that they understand when you refer to net promoter score, what you're referring to.
Sure. Net promoter score is based on a question about recommending a product or service or company to a friend or colleague or relative. And it's been around for a long time. Bain did some of the first fundamental research on it and found that companies that do well on that question tended to have very strong businesses. The way it's calculated is it's a 0 to 10 scale, and 10 being the best, 0 being the worst. Promoters are considered people who give you a 9 or a 10. There are then passives who are in the middle of that scale, and then there are detractors, which is 0 to 6. And you calculate the score by subtracting the percent of detractors from the percent of promoters, and you get a score from that. And it tends companies that are in the 50s, let's say, on the NPS, that's quite good. We've seen higher. Companies that are negative or are generally doing not so well.
Right.
And tend to lose customers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Well, that's great. That explains it very well for people. So thank you for that. I just want to make sure that it's clear to people what we're referring to, as you mentioned.
Yep.
Okay. There were a few things you were going to continue on. One of them was you were going to circle back and talk about Amazon.
Right.
But I think there may have been something else in there that people
let me first explain the threshold that we came up with in our survey work. So the 45,000 people that we surveyed last summer, basically for a company that they're a customer of, let's say they are users of an iPhone, Apple iPhone, or they use Amazon to shop. We asked them to rate, let's say, Amazon on the same 0 to 10 scale, but for each of the 30 elements of value. And after a lot of research that goes back now, almost 4 years, we determined that at least for North America, we have picked a threshold that if 50% of customers rate a company 8, 9, or 10 on that scale, we considered that to be at threshold on value delivery. So to give you an example, Amazon has pretty consistently now for a number of years delivered on 8 elements of value, 8 of the 30. And that's quite a high number. Apple is in the, depending on the survey, it's at sort of 10, 11, 12, varies a little bit by year. It's been increasing over time. But Amazon is particularly interesting because they deliver on 8 functional elements of value. Amazon is really making it easy for people to shop and to find the things that they want. And most other retailers, especially ones that have stores, don't do nearly as well. So they might only clear on 2 or 3 or 4 elements of value, depending on the retailer. And they are not doing nearly as well on other functional elements of value as Amazon is. And so the way I put it is, if you have a gap, if Amazon is delivering on 8 elements of value and really, making things easy for shoppers, and you're a retailer where you're delivering 2 or 3 or 4, as long as that gap exists, basically customers are going to migrate to Amazon and retailers will continue to lose share. And we see no sign of this ending. And in fact, we believe Amazon with Whole Foods and with Echo and other things they're working on are trying to start to deliver more emotional elements of value, like fun and entertainment, or in the case of Whole Foods, it could have to do with wellness, or hope, which is, hope for a healthier life with healthier food, whatever it might be. So Amazon is really a juggernaut of value delivery, and they've been working on it for over 25 years now, right? So they have really figured it out.
That's interesting. I mean, it must be costly to them to be able to. You had mentioned early on, if you're delivering on all 30, it's nearly impossible because of the cost. But for them to be delivering on, and you said, what was it, 8 functional?
8 elements of value, yes.
And most of those functional elements. So now it looks like they're expanding into the other value elements.
Trying to, yeah.
Yeah. So what was your advice, or what would you say to the retailers out there who are trying in some ways to compete?
Yeah. Well, I guess there are 2 things that they can do. One is they can do everything within their powers to make the shopping process easier for customers. So, one of the things about Amazon, if you're interested, let's say, in a piece of apparel, let's say a men's shirt, you can see immediately whether it's in stock or not. If I go to a store, I don't necessarily know that shirt is going to be there or whether they're going to have that in my size. And that's a potential disconnect. So anything that retailers can do to help people decide whether to go to a store, is that item in stock? Is it in my right size? That will be helpful. The other thing I would think about if you're a traditional retailer with stores is you have an advantage in that you have customers in the store. So anything you can do to connect people with store associates, to provide help to them, to make sure that they're friendly and accommodating. And there's also even the possibility, for example, of types of entertainment that you could provide in stores. I mean, people joke about, shopping being retail therapy. Well, how can you increase therapy is one of our elements of value. How can you increase that and make that shopping experience even better? So I think there are many things that retailers can do, but Amazon has really nailed these functional elements, and I think it's going to be hard for many retailers to match them on that. The only one that we've seen who has matched Amazon and in fact outperformed them slightly is Chewie, which is a pet food supplier that's online pure play, and they deliver in bulk and so forth. It's expensive, and I think they've struggled to make a profit, as has Amazon. Amazon's often chosen to go for share as opposed to profitability, but we've only seen one company that's really matched Amazon. Now, we haven't looked at all online retailers, so there may be others as well. But
right. So it's difficult to look at them all, right? But I mean, Chewie is a great example of someone who's, I guess you could say, out Amazoning Amazon,
right?
In some ways, right?
They took on Amazon in a category that is pretty rich because people love their pets, and there's a lot that Chewie's doing in terms of they'll send you condolence cards if your dog dies, or they'll send birthday wishes and things like that at the margin can seem sort of silly, but can be very powerful for people who love their cats and dogs and so forth.
Well, I mean, it could be completely honest with you, those condolence cards actually mean quite a lot. And it's something that seems very small, but it means it has so much impact. And most people, if they lose their pet, they may not right away get a new one, but they typically, dog lovers, for example, tend to end up getting another dog soon.
Yeah.
So if they've received a condolence letter and that sort of thing from Chewie, then I mean, there's more than likely
it means something. Yeah.
There, right?
I lost my dog 2 years ago, and I miss her every day, and we'll eventually get a new dog. But so I could see that could be very powerful to dog or cat lovers.
Mm-hmm. So what other insights did you want to share that you may have gotten out of this study, and then I'll have you kind of let people know how they can get a hold of the study and reach.
Yep. So just a few other observations. The drivers of Net Promoter Score across category do vary, but one of the things we've noticed is that the e-commerce players, the online, retailers, and who are helping consumers, do tend to outperform the more traditional competitors. They have an inherent advantage in that, they can provide those functional elements of value more readily. but there are also new digital players like Netflix and SoFi, which is a financial services player that are also beginning to deliver more emotional elements of value. So it's going to be very interesting to watch over the years. So that's one observation, and I guess the other observation is that it over time, categories tend to commoditize. So, for example, we found that none of the major retail banks in the United States, with the exception of USAA and to some extent Chase, clear our threshold on any elements of value. So, banking has really, it's very commoditized. Airlines are in the same situation. While Southwest does very well on a number of elements of value, most of the major airline carriers don't clear the threshold. So, you've got to think about value all the time, or you can be commoditized. And I think that's really the call to action here. We used to talk about sustainable competitive advantage in consulting, but I don't think much is sustainable anymore over the long haul. So you really need to work it. And I would say just, first of all, your listeners can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and they can also find this study at Bain.com. If they just Google my name or look for the elements of value on Bain.com, they'll find the work. And our B2B work is also there as well.
Great. I'll also try and put a direct link up to it for people on the show notes as well. I think it's really interesting what you said about not becoming commoditized, and the way I always like to look at things is actually, I hear you say those two pieces, and then I see that as opportunities within those two areas, specifically banking. I've seen some commercials recently where they're trying to reinvent banking. Now, I won't name the name, but it's a company, and they run a commercial, and it makes it look like you're walking. If their new locations are going to be, you walk in and it's a coffee shop, and they have people work there or walking around helping you, like as if they would be serving you in a coffee shop or restaurant. And I see that as an opportunity within those various sectors for some major disruption if a company really wanted to do that.
Completely agree. Yeah. And just to clarify my comment on the airlines, that we interviewed almost exclusively people who are traveling in coach class. So it may be different if you consider your first class and business class. More room for differentiation there. Yeah.
Fair enough. That makes sense too. Excellent. Well, thank you for your time. I mean, this has been very excellent.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck with your podcast.
You have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever.
Stay hungry.
Hungry. Foolish. Stay hungry. Stay foolish.
Welcome to E-Commerce All-Stars, brought to you by Nadimo.com, where we help e-commerce entrepreneurs accelerate growth through modern technology and innovative thinking.